learning about finance, discovering that our system is fucked, then learning about crypto, and then learning that crypto is the same as the rest of the system, just a bit worse. That's how I landed with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not a technological revolution, it's a social revolution and a social technology, so to speak. Because you can copy the entire code base of Bitcoin. I mean, it's literally free open source software. It's on GitHub. You can copy it, you can deploy it by yourself. But what you cannot copy is me and my belief in Bitcoin, is you and your podcast and your community in Bitcoin, right? All of that. You cannot copy that. Like, it's not that, like, because people say, oh, with Bitcoin, how, like, the Bitcoin is so volatile. How are we going to be able to price anything on the market, like on the grocery store or anywhere? It's like, guys, it's not going to be like a live chart of the price of pears and apples and bananas. Like, no, because there's companies in between that they manage this volatility for the end consumer. People are going to be making memes about us of like, oh my God, they bought Bitcoin at $100,000, even if it was just like 500 euros that they put in. And now they're being able to sell it or exchange it for a Mercedes, for example. Guys, we are in the 70s and we are the boomers.
I think that is something that we really can start with the students, because I see a big age gap in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Most of them are over 30 and the average is around like 47. At least that's what I see in my statistics. And there are a lot of people even like above 50, above 60, because people feel like you have to educate the above 50, 60 crowd on Bitcoin. No, like you have to actually educate the under 25 crowd on Bitcoin. So how did you come into Bitcoin with being a student?
Well, because I was studying economics and I was interested since very young. So like I was 16 and already thinking about like personal finance and the pension system and the retirement, because I knew that my generation was not going to get like any pensions. And I also knew that compounding interest was very powerful, but compounding interest is the most powerful the longer it is applied. So it's about time. So when you're very young, you can actually like leverage it very hard. But of course it requires patience. And through that knowledge of like, hey, I have a long time horizon and I'm not going to get any pension, any help from the government. I need to, as we say in Spanish, sacarme las castañas del fuego. I have to take out my cashews out of the fire. I think it's cashews. I don't know what castañas is now. But anyway, I got to take my things. I got to take care of them by myself, right? So I started exploring like, personal finance, how to save, what are the best ways to invest and whatnot, just with 16, 17. So quite early, quite young. But of course, the problem when you're that young is you don't have any capital and your means to generate that capital. So like cash flows, usually salaries, are quite tight. Like you don't really have many ways of making revenue, of getting paid, especially if you are like a student, a full-time student. Yeah, you could get a job, but you also want to live your life. And depending on your situation, even if you get a job, you may not be able to save too much. So I was on that path of like, okay, I know I need to save. I know I have very little capital and possibilities to generate capital. So I need to go extremely risky. Back then it was risky. Now I know it's the most conservative thing in the world. So I went all the way out to crypto. Like, whoa, that's where you can get crazy returns, right? And because I have a long investment horizon, like 40 plus years at the very least, the risks don't really matter, because the question is not where crypto is going to be in 5 years. The question is where it's going to be in 40. That's when I'm going to need that money, right, for my pension. So I went down that path. I got burned quite badly. Like I actually fell for some for one Ponzi scheme using crypto arbitrage as like the smoke and mirrors to get you confused. But that like scam was the one that like got me that $1,000 master's degree in blockchain technology, which then with that expertise led me to Bitcoin mining. I did an internship while being a college student. So I did 16 to 19. I learned about finance, personal finance and whatnot. Then I started studying economics when I was 19 in my hometown in Barcelona. And on the first year, that first summer after COVID, I got into the Ponzi scheme. And then by the next summer, I was joining a Bitcoin mining company out of Germany that they were doing both high performance computing, artificial intelligence, Bitcoin mining, all of that stuff. And it was there where I went from blockchain, not Bitcoin, to Bitcoin, only Bitcoin, nothing matters but Bitcoin. So that's that. So to this path of like learning about finance, discovering that our system is fucked, then learning about crypto, and then learning that crypto is the same as the rest of the system, just a bit worse. That's how I landed with Bitcoin.
I love that you say crypto is the same as the rest of the system, just a little bit worse. Like it's basically a fiat system, but like even worse than that, because there are absolutely no there are no structures behind that kind of have any checkpoints. It's just like pure Wild West with centralized power. So it's
Exactly.
like the worst of the worst. You pick the worst of Bitcoin and the worst of fiat, and it's crypto.
Let's see what happens if we mush them together. What? Only scams? Weird.
And it's a weird thing where I don't want to talk too much about crypto, but there are so many crypto scams, and people know they are crypto scams, but they still want to get into the investment because they think they might be able to get sooner out than the other ones and get not rug pulled. And so they try to ride those small trains to make like a 50x or 100x or 10,000x in like a few weeks, which obviously most of them get wrecked really badly.
Yeah.
But it's like most are aware that crypto is a scam. Like it's common knowledge. I made I mean, maybe it's my bubble, but I made a community post around that topic and asked like, oh, like, are you invested in anything else than Bitcoin, meaning like crypto and altcoins, and why? And people like really wrote down like, oh, like, it's pure gamble. I just like try to get more Bitcoin. Like all those answers, and 50% were fully in Bitcoin, but like still a big majority was like, oh, like I dabble with altcoins, but only for speculation. There's like no intrinsic value for me. There's no belief system.
Yeah. No, and it's quite sad because there's two types of people that invest in crypto. The people that have been fooled by the narrative of, oh, Bitcoin's too slow, but crypto, blockchain is the future. Yeah, you need to get into crypto. They're fooled by that. And they're just regular people trying to make a bit of an investment. They get in and they get scammed. They lose most of their money. So 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000 may perhaps make a bit of money. And that just keeps the cycle going. But then that's type number one. And the other type is, I would argue, even worse because they, as you said, they know that it's a scam. They know it doesn't have any value. They know that it doesn't teach you anything. It doesn't improve anything. Like, I wouldn't even say it's a zero-sum game. It's a negative-sum game, right? And they get in with their extra knowledge than the other crowd, and they try to game the system. But gaming the system just means if I make $1, you lost two. It's like, yeah, now you have more Bitcoin, but at what cost? Like, you just sold your morals to a certain degree. Like, I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. But anyway, yeah. So that's how I got into Bitcoin, and I'm glad that we agree on on the state of crypto in general. I usually like to say that Bitcoin was a step forward, and then crypto was like turning around and sprinting backwards. So yeah.
I love that. It's and I love my crowd because like I had a few weeks ago someone on that was in the past shielding Ethereum and other things like that, and he doesn't do that anymore. So he's now Bitcoin only, and he still has the. Like we debated actually on the podcast this topic of like, okay, will there be a better Bitcoin? And I said like, no. And he said like, there might be. At the moment, I don't see anything, but there might be. And even that guest that is now Bitcoin only, someone was like, oh, you're interviewing a shitcoiner, and showed me like a post of him in 2022. And I'm like, hey, that's like 3 years ago. Like people can educate them better, and they deserve a second chance.
Yeah, you brought up two interesting topics. The first one is the question of will there be a better Bitcoin? Because recently, 2 weeks ago, we had a meetup here because I run the meetups here in Barcelona, and I got asked that question. And I think I came up with a pretty nice answer for why there wouldn't be a new one. But then the second topic is the whole thing of like Bitcoin maximalism and being a Bitcoiner, and it's the fact of it's like a litmus test of like super purity. And then there's always going to be someone more pure, more hardcore than you, and they will put the bar ever so higher than you. So therefore, at the end, only one person is the true Bitcoin maximalist, and that's the fucking craziest person, right? So that's what happened. Oh, 3 years ago you touched once Ethereum. Oh, you're a shitcoiner. I love that. Or what? You also think that Monero is has value because it's dark money and not just hard money. Oh, shitcoiner, right? So it's an interesting topic, especially taking into account that as adoption happens, we're going to get more people coming in, and more people necessarily means that we're going to have an eternal September, as it's called in the Bitcoin circles, of like we will never have again the level of purity and the level of signal and the level of like depth and knowledge equally spread out across the community, because not everyone has the time, and as we adopt, we're getting further away from the super hardcore Bitcoiners and entering more the, like, hey, my mom is now buying Bitcoin, or my uncle is buying Bitcoin, or my cousin is buying Bitcoin, right? And what do they know about Bitcoin, right? But they're still Bitcoiners because they only buy Bitcoin, right? So that whole thing of like, hey, only this makes you a Bitcoiner, that's going away. But then the first topic on if there's going to be a better Bitcoin, what I answered in the meetup is that it's never going to happen, because Bitcoin is not a technological revolution. It's a social revolution and a social technology, so to speak. Because you can copy the entire code base of Bitcoin. I mean, it's literally free open source software. It's on GitHub. You can find it everywhere. You can copy it. You can deploy it by yourself. But what you cannot copy is me and my belief in Bitcoin, is you and your podcast and your community in Bitcoin, right? All of that. You cannot copy that. Like, you can't. There's no way of doing like Control C, Control V. You can do that with the code, but not with the network. And what matters is the network, because Bitcoin may be layer 1, but the humans are layer 0. Nodes are not run by themselves. There's people behind them that run them and that have them at home and then maintain them and decide which upgrade goes in and which upgrade goes out, and what they put on them, right? So that's layer 0. And you cannot copy humans. So that's the revolution, because money is a social technology, right? So that's what I answered, and I thought like that's a good way to like dispel all of that. Oh, but what if this new shitcoin with this and that, with this technology and that technology? Great, perfect. But unless they have a better launch than what Bitcoin had, more fair, transparent, open for everyone, with no actual founding member, like he shouldn't be around for more than it's necessary. Like, unless they're able to do that, plus also copy the network effects, they're not going to be able to. And everyone says, oh, what if Facebook destroyed MySpace? Yeah, that's a different thing. Like, that's not money. That's just like social networks. People were using MySpace. People were using Microsoft MSN, right? With the buzzes and whatnot. People were using all kinds of social platforms. But people only use one money, usually, mostly.
And also there's the aspect of like, you compare a product to a protocol. Like Bitcoin is a protocol and Facebook is a product.
Exactly.
Products always have like for example, if you use a wallet, this might be replaced because there might come a wallet on Bitcoin. There might come a better hardware wallet. There might come a better mining device. Like there might come better products around Bitcoin, the protocol, but the protocol Bitcoin will stick around. Just the way we use the TCP/IP protocol, there are so many different protocols that they still use, and then we just have the different layers on top of each other, and the more we move up the layers, the higher the competition gets. Like we already have like Bitcoin, and then there's like Liquid and Lightning, and there's more competition going on layer 2 than on layer 1, because it's just Bitcoin. And then on layer 3 and layer 4, which might be an ETF, might be Bitcoin on exchange, might be like a Fedimint, might be like whatever it is, layer 3 or 4, like however you want to define that, there's competition, but not on the base product protocol level. So I do enjoy that a lot. And also one thing is the protocol is moldable. So it's not a protocol that is like static and we cannot change it. If there's actually something interesting going on in altcoins or anything else, we could adopt it in Bitcoin. If it's essential, we will adopt it because people will like to continue use Bitcoin and not lose all their life savings.
Exactly, yeah. And it's funny that you say that because it was two of us on stage answering that question, and I gave my part, but you actually gave the same answer as my friend. So like I don't know, it's great. Like the parallels, you know. But anyway, yeah, so
That's amazing. Yeah, like I because there are probably those two arguments. Like I don't know if I could make a third one with now having had over 400 podcast interviews in Bitcoin. I have to each topic some arguments, but I think like those two are the main arguments you could make around why there won't be a better Bitcoin. But you also sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah, I was just agreeing because those are the ones that are just slam dunks. There's no way to refute that. So yeah, 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. I still get that, and people don't get the basics of Bitcoin. Like they don't get that it's a protocol. And once I tell them, then it's a like I tell them, okay, like it's because people compare Bitcoin to MasterCard. Sometimes people compare also then Bitcoin to Facebook and MySpace. Like that example is very popular. And once I just calmly say like, oh, like, but you're comparing a product to a protocol, they're like, oh, like, okay.
Yeah,
And I never looked at that that way. Like, yeah, of course, because Bitcoin is a protocol, not a product. And Facebook is a product, not a protocol. And they are like completely mind blown by this simple fact.
yeah. Like one way I like to compare it is with things like I like to explain protocols with football or roads. Roads because like we are driving with huge 2-ton metal boxes at 120 kilometers per hour, and honestly, there's not really many accidents. Yes, there's accidents, but taking into account we're just going around with enough energy to like, like a bullet, it's quite safe. Why? Because we all have a protocol, we all understand each other, and we know these lines, they mean don't cross, these lines, they mean you stop here, these signals signify this and that, and that's how we all manage to like talk to each other. And the same happens in many other places. One of them is language. We only understand each other because we speak the same protocol, right? We have the same rules for like, hey, here comes the name, here comes the verb, here comes the adjective, right? And you construct sentences this way. This word means this thing, this word means that thing. And if I start changing the meaning of words, we're not going to understand each other. And the last one is football, because it's very visual. Like football, soccer for all the Americans. Like if we're all playing soccer, we're all playing football, we all know the rules. And if someone touches it with the ball with their hands in outside of the goalkeeper's area and he's not a goalkeeper, we all scream at the same time, "Hey dude, what the hell? What are you doing? You shouldn't be doing that." We only play with everything except our hands, right? You can touch it with your head, you can touch it with your knees, you can touch it with your chest, but mostly also with your feet, right? But the moment you break the rules, there's a problem. And if that person starts screaming, "Hey, but I want to play with the hands," we're going to say, "Great. It's great that you want to do that. But the rules are these ones. We're playing in this field and the ball is ours. There's another field down there. You can go there and you can try to convince other people to play with you." And that's what happens with all of the other cryptos. And what happens is football is the biggest sport in the world. And then you have other variants and other different ways of playing it. Oh, there's cricket. Now we have a bat. There's basketball. Now we can bounce it. There's rugby. There's all these other ways. But football is still number one because it's the most accepted, right? And everyone speaks the language of football. There's crazy stories like in the First World War. I think winter of 1916, right, where both sides, the German side and I think the French side, they both went out of their trenches, and for one night, one evening, they just started playing football. Even though the Germans couldn't speak with the French and the French couldn't speak with the Germans, right? But football united them. Why? Because it was a protocol. And then you have products. Products are guns, let's say, in this weird case. And guns in wars keep changing, right? There's also a great article, it's more like an essay from from what is it called? Like from guns to power, not from cryptography, ballestas a cryptografía, something like that. It was about like how what are those arrows? Not arrows, like arch. I don't know the name right now. Let me search it. Like they're called springs. That's what they're called. Where you click and then the arrow flies out like an automatic Bogen in German.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Do you know the German word now?
yeah. I'm German. I'm half
Oh,
German.
wait, you're German.
Yeah.
I thought you were Spanish.
I'm half Spanish, half German. My mom is
Oh,
German.
interesting.
Yeah.
I see. Like now 30 minutes in now.
Yeah. We should have started there, right? But we just got going. But yeah, so and there's
Yeah,
this great.
people actually complain about that a lot in the comments because I don't like to make introductions. Like they're like usually how a podcast is going. Like the podcast host usually has like a small list prepared of like, oh, today we are talking with XY and he is making this in that company, and it's so boring for me. And I don't want to do that. I just want to talk with a person. But I do get a lot of feedback saying like, "Oh, please introduce your guest that we know who is speaking." I was like, "Yeah, Bitcoin is speaking." Like, what else do you need to know?
I mean, if I guess I can also do a quick introduction to myself, like or a quick like summary of who I am. Half Spanish, although I already did kind of. I spoke about like how I got into Bitcoin, all of that. But anyway, half
Yeah,
Spanish, German.
that's the thing. Like, I think you don't get it in the beginning, but over the 1 hour, usually what happens, the guest actually, without even knowing it, introduces himself because there are like small things coming along, like, oh, like he's working at that company, or that's how he got into Bitcoin, or that's probably how old he is. Like, there's like all those small nuggets that come actually from the podcast, and I like it. I like that organic way of it. It's also like, if you get to know someone, I always find it weird as like, oh, please introduce yourself.
Like,
You just start a conversation and then you get to know each other while having that conversation quite organically. But yeah, sorry,
no,
go
no,
ahead.
you're right. Because it's like, imagine we're at a bar or we meet in some party, and then I go up to you like, "Hey, what's up? Hey, nice to meet you." We shake hands. We say, "Hi, I'm Kenobi. You're Robin." And then I pull out a form with a pen, and I'm like, "Please fill it out." Like, where do you work? What's your age? What did you study? It will be like
Please consent to this conversation.
exactly, yeah. So yeah, 100%. I agree with that. But at the same time, I understand that people want to know. Like, it depends on your approach to podcasting, right? Like, if you are offering it as a product, as a like prepackaged product, like always buying the same type of cereal, people just want to get the same thing, perhaps a different taste, perhaps a bit different of information, but always the same thing. Or if you just package it like Joe Rogan, so to speak, where it says like, "Hey, dude, I'm having interesting conversations with interesting people." It depends on what you want, and then people, let's say the audience, has to be responsible adults and choose, hey, I'm more of this type of person and therefore this type of podcast, or I'm more of that type of person and therefore more that type of podcast. But yeah, they will
Yeah,
always
I think the main thing that people want to get confirmed is what credibility does the guest bring to the podcast talking about the topic? Because a topic, I mean, I try to give some hints at the topic with the introduction. So there's like a 30 to 90 seconds introduction with some highlights of the podcast. In that way, before the podcast starts, because usually the first 20 minutes are not as interesting as the last 20 minutes. I got to know, like, if a podcast is 1.5 hours long, usually the last 30 minutes, or like the last, like, usually around 60% to like 90% is the most interesting part of every podcast, because the warm-up phase is at the end, and there's usually like this the spike in there. And so what you want to do is like give some highlights of like what are the highlights of those conversations that you kind of confirm, okay, like this is an interesting conversation, I want to get into that. And then what usually people also want is like, okay, like who's that guy? Like why is he credible to talk about what he's talking about? And I've seen, for example, Diary of a CEO, sorry to talk about so long about podcast, but Diary of a CEO does it really clever. He, in the introduction, he already has narrated speakings around the guest, like not only highlights, but also a second voice that is not him or the guest, that is just explaining who the guest actually is in an extremely dramatic way. It's almost like a cinema trailer to the podcast. But he also has a team of 50 people at the one podcast. I have now one post-production part-time helper, so like,
Congratulations.
I'm getting there, but like it's still a smaller thing. So I'm still thinking like, oh, like how should I introduce the credibility of the guest without it being very boring? And the best way is the intro, yeah.
Without making it formulaic. I don't know. Like a set form. Yeah, I get that. It can be tough because you want to strike the balance, right? Because in a way, that reminds me of this thing my grandpa used to tell me, that life should be lived backwards, meaning you should first be an old man, then you get younger, then you see how your nieces, you enjoy the time with your nieces, then you get to be a father, so to speak, then you get to be younger, then you get to study, right? Because college will be much more enjoyable when you have already lived 70 years, because you already know how important knowledge is, right? And also kids will be more enjoyable once you have already enjoyed nieces, nieces, nephews, no, grandchildren, apologies. But once you have enjoyed time with your grandchildren, then having children is like, oh wow, you have that more extra knowledge, you already know what to do, right? And then by the time you're young, you already know what it felt like to have an old body and a rusty body. Now you get to truly take care of that. But of course, that's not how life works, and you need to do the proof of work first before you get to enjoy, right? You first need to have children before you get to enjoy the grandchildren. So in a way, that's the same happens with a podcast, right? You need to go through the introduction, through the explanation, through the laying the foundation before you can get to the interesting part of like the insides, the golden nuggets, right? That people sometimes drop. So yeah, I get that.
Absolutely. And but that's why we have so many different formats like that, like shorts from the podcast, there are clips from the podcast, shorts under 30 seconds, clips from like 1 minute, so like 5-10 minutes. You can cut things out if it's really valuable. Even the community does it on its own, like, oh, like I like that 5 minutes so much, I cut it out and put it on social media myself. And I do enjoy that. Like there's so many clips of, let's stick with the Joe Rogan example. There's so many Joe Rogan clips out there on every platform that he didn't produce because people find it enjoyable. And if something is really good in the podcast, it will find its way in the internet. That's a great thing. Like I love seeing more and more community clips on Twitter just getting thrown out there. And by the way, I try to mention it every other podcast. You can actually do this with my podcast. I don't want to have any credit for that. Like my podcast is open source. You can take any clips and just like post it wherever you want. You can even make advertisement with it. I've put the YouTube Creative Commons license in there. You just take it and do whatever you want with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's I think the approach to content creation. I think we benefit, all of us benefit if we collaborate as much as possible. Yeah, but maybe coming back to what you said before, maybe coming back to the protocol and rules, that it's really interesting because you also mentioned that war. I have a similar story actually. I was in Egypt playing beach volleyball when the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, and I played mostly beach volleyball with Russians and Ukrainians, and it was kind of a weird time because you saw in the news how Russia and Ukraine are having all of a sudden this war, and then you see Russians and Ukrainians playing beach volleyball, and loving every second of it. So there's this weird thing also that like sports is kind of
Yeah.
connecting us sometimes. But it speaks to this rule set of like, yeah, you know beach volleyball, you know soccer, like you just accept the rules and you play in them. There may be with beach volleyball, there's people that don't know exact rules, but with soccer, like most, especially in Europe, everyone knows the rules. It's quite simple, and that's the main advantage of having those strict rule sets and having them apply to everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. Football, don't touch it with your hands, right? Don't touch the ball with your hands. In Bitcoin, don't spend a UTXO that you don't have, or don't ever spend more Bitcoins than what you have. This way we avoid 21 million, right? Like surpassing the 21 million. So having a hard cap. So yeah, 100%. Agree.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Interesting. And it's also one thing, because we talked about the TCP/IP protocol, one thing about Bitcoin that's super interesting is that we have a token, not only the network, Bitcoin and the protocol of itself, but we also have a token to it that we can buy and has a value and an exchange rate. This we didn't have with internet, and it was so fun to think about, like, what if there was like an underlying TCP/IP token like that you could buy, and then like how different would the story of the internet would have been if there's something like that in the internet. It doesn't really make sense, but maybe that TCP/IP token is now Bitcoin, and I just kind of wanted to have your thoughts with like the protocol and Bitcoin being maybe that token of the internet.
That's an interesting thought, because in a way, because I recently read the Genesis book by Aaron van Weerdum. Hopefully I didn't butcher his name. And in a way, you do realize that the people building the internet were also the people building Bitcoin. Not all of them achieved it, right? Only one of them, or a group of them, Satoshi Nakamoto, managed to do that. But in a way, it was like the same people could have actually implemented it on the same place. And also, it could have actually happened with David Chaum's thing. Like he had in Amsterdam some startup, I don't remember the name, DigiCash, right? Which, as Aaron explains, apparently everything that David Chaum did, he tried to have the DC. So like David Chaum He always tried to have everything start with D and C. And he didn't have that. And apparently, like Microsoft was very close to integrating DigiCash into all of its operating system. That would have been a huge jump in the amount of users using DigiCash. But in a way, it's good that everything else failed, and it's good that the internet didn't have a coin, because if it had a coin, or they would have managed to get a coin, like one of two. They either would have created Bitcoin, in which case we would have had Bitcoin much earlier, which could have been positive, could have been negative. We don't know, right? That's one of the problems of social sciences. You never know, like what could have happened. You can only speculate. And the other thing is, so they could have managed to create Bitcoin, or they could have just created something much worse and just another fiat shitcoin that would have eventually required the creation of Bitcoin either way. So in a way, it's good that, like, things happen separately, because in a way they're separate. Bitcoin doesn't need the internet. Bitcoin would still work even if the internet shut down. It would just be much more janky and much worse. It's like saying, hey, could I use my car if all of the road networks disappeared? You still could. You could still drive your Volkswagen, your Toyotas around places. Would they break much more often? Would it be much more annoying? 100%. But in a way, you would still be able to do that. And with Bitcoin, it's the same. Just that the internet is that already laid out infrastructure that we are enjoying, that we are using to power Bitcoin. But we by no means need it, right? Because Bitcoin, we can send transactions via text messages, via what's it called, like long waves, radio waves, FM, AM, right? Radio waves. We can send them in any. We could even send them with like pigeons, because you could just write down either the zeros and ones or in whichever format you put it in a paper. You give it to the pigeon, and he flies to wherever else the other nodes are interconnected, and that's it. And then your transaction is broadcasted to the network. So we don't really need the internet. So anyway, that's once again another detour, but yeah.
Yeah, it's. I heard this one interesting quote. It's like the internet is only here to enable Bitcoin even better. It's like to power up Bitcoin on a global scale. It's really interesting, and it's magical for me, like that we have Bitcoin. When you think about the Bitcoin history on how many points it could have broken, but it never did. That's kind of really magical for me. Do you think it's a discovery or an invention?
Oh, I've heard it so many different ways, and I've been like flip flopping from one side to the other. Cause like, what was it? I think it was like an invention, not a discovery. But I don't really care. Like, in a way, that's also something I've been saying lately, because people say, "Oh, what is Bitcoin? Is it an asset? Is it a token? Is it a coin? Is it an asset? Is it?" I don't know. And I'm like, who gives a single flying fuck? Sorry for the f bomb, but like, who cares? It's here. Deal with it. Like, who cares if powder is like plant-based powder or made out of carbon or just a chemical solution? Who gives a shit when bullets are flying in your direction powered by powder, by black powder, right? You don't care when there's someone shooting at you, when someone's using that technology. You don't care if, oh my God, does it follow ESG rules? Nobody cares. Like, it's just here. You have to deal with it. You can complain about it. That's a way to deal with it. But don't be surprised if in 10 years, 20 years, no, you're not here to complain or nobody listens to you, right? So that's the other thing, right? So these questions, they're super interesting and super philosophical, but I'm not the smartest person to talk about that. I'm much more qualified to talk about Bitcoin mining and like the history of Bitcoin mining and communities in Spain and, European level and education and being a student and also being a Bitcoiner, that type of stuff, than that. Even though I already gave an answer. So, but anyway.
I think your answer was actually good. On the ESG thing, it's also related. The first topic that is related to the Bitcoin mining. Are you still hearing that mining thought that like mining is very energy intensive, or like it's a waste of energy? Is that still for me? It really slowed down.
Yes, it really slowed down. But also, since I've been, let's say, moving from one company to another, so I used to work for a Bitcoin miner. So bit of background on myself so that people understand why I'm saying that. So when I got summer of 2022, I entered the no summer of 2021. Apologies. Right as the China Bitcoin mining ban was happening, I started at the Bitcoin mining company um, as an intern, summer intern, and I was 2 years down with my college, my economics degree. But that's when I got orange pilled in there, not because of the company itself. Something I've realized with my past, what is it now, 4 years in the mining industry, is that, well, almost four, is that most of the Bitcoin mining companies, they're just fiat mining. Like they're just fiat companies that just found a different source of revenue. That's it. Like especially the publicly traded ones and the big ones, they can say whatever. Their marketing department can say whatever, but like where rubber meets the road, that's the truth. But anyway, I got the chance to orange pill myself to learn about Bitcoin, and actually that happened when I learned about how proof of work works. Like the day that proof of work clicked for me, that's the point of no return, right? Um, so then I ended up working for a full year with them, first as an intern, then as a part-time student while I was doing my Erasmus in Mannheim, and then full-time. And for that semester, I didn't go to college back in Barcelona, and I just kept working. And then I started my college again, and that's when I started doing meetups in Barcelona, and also being like doing more volunteer work, going to conferences, that type of stuff. Um, and for about a year and a half, that's what I kept doing. I kept learning economics, fiat economics, but well, it's different to learn fiat economics when you already know real economics, or not real, but like Austrian economics or other points of view. Because something that I'm also very interested in is on behavioral economics and how that contrasts with Austrian economics. Because many times in Austrian economics, we have this like Mickey Mouse creating some Mickey Mouse model where we create a lot of assumptions and we assume that everyone's rational and everyone has perfect information and all of that, right? The Homo economicus, right? And then you read stuff about behavioral economics and how come the same cake, if it's priced at $5 or $50 per piece, it tastes different, or people say it tastes different, right? That's super interesting, and that's not really rational, right? So anyway, that's a different topic. So I finished my studies last year, and before I finished my degree, I was invited back into the company to keep working part time on Bitcoin mining stuff. Also for that hiatus, as I was studying, I kept doing Bitcoin mining stuff, mostly Bitcoin mining analysis, because that's what I'm good at: Bitcoin mining analysis, business development, um, on the Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin in general. And they invited me back, and then as I graduated, I told them, thank you for the ride, but I want to see new horizons. And I recently joined the company, the team at Demand Pool, and we're deploying the first Stratum V2 pool. So, like, that explains also a main reason why it's gotten quieter for me, because I went from being with the miners, right, and that those are the ones getting most of the hate or most of the FUD, to being with the pool. But regardless of that, having a pulse on the mining industry, I've definitely noticed that the efforts by especially Daniel Batten have pushed down and toned down. Well, Daniel Batten, Bitcoin Policy Institute, Troy, Margot Pius, like this entire cohort of people, they have definitely like dispelled most of the FUD. On an institutional level, that's the caveat, because on a citizen level, on a like on a broader level, there's been so many years of misinformation. There's been so many years of FUD. There's been so many years of lies that I'm still getting sometimes that question of, oh, but doesn't it use too much energy? Or, oh, but isn't it bad for the environment? And it's not coming from any company, it's coming from people. And then, but this time, at least now, compared to before, we actually have data and we have studies, and we can very calmly say, you're just plainly wrong. And they because they don't really have an opinion, they just have heard about it. They just go like, oh, I'm sorry, okay, yeah, but how? And you just explain it to them. Look, renewable energies. They're destroying the grid. They're making it more unstable. We're actually powering it. We're plugging the hole where the renewables have been making in the grid. Furthermore, when you compare it to other industries in the similar categories like banking, for example, or the US dollar. How is the US dollar backed? Ooh, what? By the US Army? Interesting. How many CO2 emissions do they have? Oh, what are you saying? 100 times more than the entire Bitcoin network? That's curious. And they also bring death and destruction behind them. Interesting. Bitcoin has never done that. Bitcoin has never killed anyone. So perhaps that's not a real, perhaps if that's a complaint that you have, you shouldn't be pointing it to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. You should be pointing it at the US dollar and US dollar sovereignty, or US dollar mining, if you might, right? Perhaps that's where you should be directing your complaints at, not Bitcoin. And people very quickly, because that's the thing, when you have either worked in the industry or studied Bitcoin, or have informed yourself, done a bit of the proof of work, you can then mint blocks, so to speak, right? You have the proof of work on your side. And the other person, what do they know? They just read two or three titles, news titles, and that's it. They're now informed, right? So it's very easy to nowadays dispel that and say, you know what, get back to where you came from. This is not, you're looking dumb.
Absolutely. It's also interesting how what we know Bitcoin is, and how the average person that hasn't studied Bitcoin yet thinks Bitcoin is, and what are the different narratives around Bitcoin. And one thing that I'm also never connected, because there are those studies that show people say a cake that costs $7 is better than a cake that has $5, and all those things, and even the color of the plate it's served on, it makes a difference, and this all plays in there, and I never connected that to how differently people now see Bitcoin versus 5 years ago, where it was a 10K, now it's at 100K. From an average, Bitcoiners don't view it differently. I think I don't generally view it differently. I learned a lot about Bitcoin in the last 5 years, but I don't see it differently. It's, because of the price, it's more about the learnings I had. What do you think is the impact of the price of Bitcoin? Is it similar with compared to a cake? People view it in a better light, or does it make things worse?
I think sadly it makes things worse because people are not aware of the fact that you can actually subdivide Bitcoins into 100 million units called Satoshis, right? And also the problem is that many people don't understand, because they still think it's a product, they don't understand that this protocol, it can, and it most likely will, eat up a huge chunk of the world's value. And they think that I got here too late, right? The classic, oh, but I don't, and especially going back to the whole students and younger people conversation. I've been having this conversation with my friends. I mean, at this point, we're a bit older. We're from 25 to 28 years old, right? And we're starting to make money, and we're starting to have savings. But of course, we're in Spain. We're not making 5K a month like in the US. We're making perhaps a tops 2,000, 2,500 after taxes. That's because of the Spanish tax system. Anyways, a huge lie. You are always kind of paying 50% income taxes. But that's a different topic. And of course, people my friends, they ask me but what's the point? If I only have $100, $200, right? A month to save, what's the point? Or euros. And I'm well, you're looking at it from a warped perspective. You think it's already too high, but you don't see that you're just not even a hundredth of the way there. Bitcoin is not even close to its maximum potential. And also, you're not looking at the other alternatives and adjusting for risk and also for effort. Because something that we do in finance a lot is risk-adjusted returns. But something that I've also started to do is risk and effort-adjusted returns. Because especially as a Bitcoin miner, lots of people come to me and Bitcoin mining analyst, lots of people come to me oh, hey Kenobi, should I start doing Bitcoin mining? Hey, I want to buy some machines and start doing Bitcoin mining. I'm look, it's a great idea. Like everyone wants to do it, and we need to decentralize the network. But like, as an advice for you, when you adjust the returns on fiat terms and even on Bitcoin terms to the risk that you're taking on with Bitcoin mining and also to the effort. Because as a hodler, you just buy every month or buy every week or buy whenever you feel like it. You never sell and you sleep like a baby. You don't care. You don't need to do any TA, no analysis, no anything. But as a miner, you're first of all starting on the negative. There's a negative cash flow. You send, who knows, 50K, so half a Bitcoin to get a few machines and also the electrical infrastructure. So you're starting in the hole and you need to work all the way back up. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, because the difficulty runs away from you, so to speak, and the electricity prices also become much higher. That's something that happened in winter of 2022, where suddenly we had what I called the double guillotine, because we had difficulty coming from the bottom and the price coming from the top and dropping, so decreasing the hash price, so decreasing the returns, but also energy prices here in Europe going up. And the miners in Europe were being hyper squeezed, like double guillotine, right? That's why we have no industry anymore regarding Bitcoin mining in Europe. I mean, there's a bit in northern Norway, but even 3 years ago, it was much bigger than what it is today, right? So I tell them that, and I was like, look, when you adjust for risk and you adjust for returns, an effort, I mean, when you adjust for risk and effort, Bitcoin mining doesn't usually make sense. Like, it's just not worth it. Like, just hodl and you'll be happy, so to speak. Yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
yeah, and more of it.
Okay, good, because I just went on a rant here.
Yeah, I think the original one was like the different perception of the price of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
but I think it's a really good one. It's also it's never really too late to adopt a good money, and I like the way you brought up like the alternative, because people are like, oh, but Bitcoin is like it's not going high, and so like, okay, but even if that's true, like even if you if think the limit is now reached, why don't you consider the fundamental thing of what Bitcoin is? And if your money, because I can also guarantee you the euro is not going higher.
Exactly. That's the other thing I tell people. Yeah.
It's like you have considered the opportunity cost of like where's your money now and where's it going, and it's never too late to adopt the best strategy possible, and Bitcoin is the best strategy possible.
Yeah. Then there's also something that I've been starting to say to my friends of my age, because in my generation, people that are like, well, my generation and below, so to speak. Although, Robin, how old are you, if I can ask?
26.
26. Hey, you're also part of my generation. 1999 or 1998?
1998.
Oh, okay. Well, now we're enemies forever. 1999 better than 98. No, I'm kidding. Anyway.
No, actually, I would love to have 99, because my birthday is the 9th of September, so 99. So like the 9998. So if I had the same date with like 99, that would be a really cool birthday.
That would be very clean. That would be very clean. Certified clean. But anyway, I bet you know this as well. Like, in our generation, having a house, like our friends, like there's no hope for that. And the usual joke, like that I've heard all the time, is like, haha, the boomers, they bought their houses for like 32 strawberries and now they're selling them for $2 million. Motherfuckers, right? And I'm like, guys, do you realize that we are the boomers in the 70s? Like, but instead of real estate, it's Bitcoin. Like, in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years, people will look at us and be like, you absolute douche. You could have bought 5 houses, so to speak, right? For just $20,000 each, right? Which is nothing, right? In this case, it would be like, you could have bought a few 0.1 Bitcoin for just a few thousand euros. Now it's sitting at 22 million. Now it's sitting at 50 million, right? what did you do in your 70s, in the 70s, in the 80s, right? Like, why didn't you buy more houses, right? And we're literally those people. They're going to be complaining about us because we had the chance to buy Bitcoin under 1 million, and we're going to be able to like sell it, although I don't believe we should sell it. If anything, we should exchange it for goods and services, but in a way that's selling it, right? From a purchasing power perspective, we will be selling it at a much higher level. And of course, people are going to, the same way that we make memes about boomers, like, oh my God, they bought their houses for nothing and now they're selling them for a lot. People are going to be making memes about us of like, oh my God, they bought Bitcoin at $100,000, even if it was just like 500 euros that they put in. And now they're being able to sell it or exchange it for a Mercedes, for example. Like, think about it, right? Like, so yeah, that's something I've been telling friends and family, like, guys, we are in the 70s and we are the boomers. Wouldn't you buy 5 houses, 7 houses, stretch yourself a little bit thinner to have that much more real estate? And now in 2020, 2025, be like the king? Well, it's the 70s. But instead of real estate, it's Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you probably have talked about that meme. I just searched it. It's actually like, as you said, 2 million actually, the original meme. And just for the people that listening, it says boomers selling their homes for 2 million after buying them in 1969 for 7 raspberries. And it's basically some boomers dancing, and it's just a hilarious video.
It's great.
And the people will make the same thing with Bitcoin. Like that's 100% sure. You can copy that now, and you can clip that video in let's say
30 years.
Yeah, 40 years, 50 years, and the same exact meme will be there with Bitcoin, because it will be true. And I mean, to some extent, it's already true. Like there are websites, if you go like 12 years back in the past, where you get for entering an email address 5 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like, like the meme will be like, oh, he got 5 Bitcoin for 1 email address, and 5 Bitcoin will be like the equivalent of multiple homes, like almost half cities. So it will be like such ridiculous thing, and it will. I'm really looking forward to those memes. For some reason, that meme really spreads joy in me.
But the good part is that, so there's also something about the very, very sad about this real estate and how it was turned into this great investment. And it's the fact that the great investment of one generation is the unaffordable housing of the next one, right? But the difference with Bitcoin is that you don't need Bitcoin to live inside of it, right? You don't live inside of your investment. And people put that as a bad thing. But in a way, the fact that in 40, 50 years, our great investment will be sold to the next generation doesn't mean that they will not be able to live somewhere. Like, we're not taking away their housing like it's happening nowadays, right? So that's another one of those extra things. Like the whole thing of like Bitcoin is better than gold because gold, it's usually, people usually defend gold as a better store of value than Bitcoin. Oh, because there's industrial uses. But then the people that actually know the truth is like, actually that muddies the water. That makes it worse for everyone else. And the same with housing. Housing, it has, let's say, domestic uses. But then if you use it as a store of value, you're diminishing the space for the domestic use because you're using it as a store of value. And therefore, people like you and I were priced out of a house. But what other use than store of value does Bitcoin have? We're not pricing out anyone else, right? So that's going to be one of the, let's say, silver linings of Bitcoin becoming the store of value for the next 40 years instead of real estate. So yeah, anyway, that's my 2 sats there.
And the third side would be that I think it's really important to add. Bitcoin is a proof of work system, and you could say that also about homes, about real estate. But because it's so connected to the credit market, it's actually not. Like if you have like 5 homes, it's way easier to get like the 50th one.
Yeah.
So with Bitcoin, just because you have 5 Bitcoin doesn't mean the sixth one gets easier just because of the fact of 5 Bitcoin, because every Bitcoin requires for you to work for it, either to buy it with money or to actually work for it. And this is a whole different system than the fiat system. And yes, there's this argument like, oh, like there will be fiat products with Bitcoin, and then you can borrow out your 5 Bitcoin and get like a sixth one very easily. And the cantillionaire effect is the same. But just because the fiat system does that also with Bitcoin doesn't mean Bitcoin is wrong. It's the fiat system.
But also, there's a huge difference. Everyone will have the same opportunities. Because right now, the cantillionaire effect, the cantillon effect, doesn't apply to something that everyone can do. It only applies to the unequal access to the money printer. Right? So if I have dinner with Christine Lagarde and you don't, my company will survive and yours won't, right? Or I will, get more funds than yours, right? But with under Bitcoin, nobody can print more Bitcoin. Like that's impossible. You cannot do it. So therefore, even if you can take on more risk, because getting on leverage, like getting out debt to buy your 6 Bitcoin, it just means you're taking more risk. And you could end up with actually 3 Bitcoins instead of 6. Because that was a bet. It went wrong. Like I bet that if I take this loan, I will not lose. And I can get an extra Bitcoin for free. But it's never for free because there's always risk. And it's always a probability. And 1 out of 10 times, 1 out of 100 times. So if 100 people did it, let's say 10 of them would actually lose 3 Bitcoins each. And that's how the other ones, kind of, so to speak, managed to get risk-free that extra Bitcoin. It's not risk-free. It's just that by sheer luck, they didn't have bad luck. And they are in the good scenario, not the bad scenario. But of course, you repeat that enough times. Like you repeat flipping a coin and seeing how many times you get the number, like heads, in a row, at some point you're going to get it wrong, right? And that's when everything collapses. And in a way, that's also what we're doing with the economy, and that's why printing money is bad, because if we had more like frequent smaller crises, we would be cleaning out the forest more times, and we would not allow all of the debris, all of the dry matter to accumulate, and then suddenly there's a spark, and like it happens here in Spain, it happens in California, it happens in Australia. Suddenly the entire forest is on fire, right? But it only happens every 20 years. Oh, great, but we don't have a forest then, right? So that's the big difference with the Bitcoin system versus the fiat system. Is the fact that we're all equal, and nobody has this extra joker card that they can play when things go wrong for them, and we cannot use that.
And then we create a system where the best ideas win and not the ideas that are closest to the money printer.
Exactly. There you go. You said it much better than I did.
It was just a one sentence summary. But it's really interesting that one thing that I've noted down in the beginning, what you said, which would be an interesting thing to talk about, is what a Bitcoin max is. That you remember right in the beginning of like those two things that you brought up, and I think you seem like a really based Bitcoiner of like having a very straightforward view of Bitcoin. So what is for you a Bitcoin maxi, and would you yourself describe yourself as one?
I mean, that's the problem, right? You're basically asking me to put a bar and say, am I above it or below it, right? And usually that's a conflict of interest because I'm the regulator and also the regulated, right? Because I'm putting the bar and I'm choosing, am I above or below it, right? I would define myself as a Bitcoin maximalist, but I feel like I put the bar both at the same time in a paradoxical way, much lower, but also much higher. Because in a way, I feel like you should be able, like for example, something I used to say is that Ethereum did provide a certain level of value when it was proof of work, because it was provably something that nobody else had done, and that's a decentralized computer. There were all of these GPUs that allowed you to do decentralized computing, illegal computing if you might want, right? North Korea doesn't want you to do that transaction or that computation. You can push it onto the GPUs of the Ethereum network, ideally, right? it was a bit, not really, but whatever. So, right, that's a bit of value. It does not mean, not even close, that Ethereum is anything like Bitcoin. It's completely different, right? But it doesn't mean that it didn't have any value, right? So I consider myself a maxi in the sense that there's only one money. There's only going to be one money, most likely Bitcoin. But that doesn't mean that everything else is shit. But we have to be very clear, and that's the problem, right? Being very clear depends on who you talk to. If I'm talking to you, I can be very clear and you can understand the nuances. But when I'm talking to a shitcoiner or when I'm talking to a no coiner, I cannot say like, oh yeah, there's also a bit of value here or there. Or for example, Monero. I think Monero is the perfect example because it had a fair launch, and as Giacomo Zucco presented it on Baltic Honey Badger 2022, I believe, or 2023, there's hard money, that's Bitcoin. It's useful, it's cypherpunk, and then there's dark money. They can both not coexist at the same time because if you have dark money, you cannot verifiably, transparently audit it. That's Bitcoin. But if you can verifiably, transparently audit it, then everyone can do it, included the government, included your enemies. So therefore, having a dark money is also interesting. But of course, for the savings purpose, that's the main problem with fiat, right? The important one at this point is Bitcoin. So therefore, we need to be clear to say Bitcoin only Bitcoin. That's Bitcoin maximalism, right? But at the same time, once you're more like you understand the nuances, like yourself, I can be like, hey, look, yeah, Bitcoin is first the most important, but also this other coin also has value. Would I recommend you buy it? Only if you, as an adult, responsible adult, have done your research, understand why you need it, and choose to use it. But for a no coiner, I'd be like, nah, dude, absolute trash. Don't look at it, right? So in a way, I'm both placing the bar very high and very low for myself for what a Bitcoin maximalist is, because it depends on who you're talking to. And you have to adjust the way that you talk to. So yes, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, but of course, I'm a different level of Bitcoin maximalist depending on who I'm talking to you. If I'm talking to you, I would say perhaps I'm less of a Bitcoin maximalist because we can have a more nuanced, interesting conversation. But if I'm talking to a no coiner, hell no, I'm super toxic. Like cutthroat. You say any other coin, I'll be like, bow, 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 get out of here.
I love that. You also said one sentence that is so clear under Bitcoiners, but so unclear under non-Bitcoiners. It's like, of course, we will only have one money. Why do you think this is? Like, why do you think we will only have one money if we now have so many different currencies?
Yeah, it depends on the time frame that you take. I feel like for the next 50 to 60 years, we will have some weird hybrid where the dollar will have the dollar milkshake theory thing happen where only the dollar survives. But then Bitcoin will be like either backing dollar and at the same time being an independent currency, or just kind of like the dollar working as in some way, and the Bitcoin being used by example by the BRICS nations and all of the neutral nations of the world that don't want to get fucked over, in a way similar to how nowadays in Venezuela there's like multiple coins being used because people recognize different values for different things. Bitcoin will be used as the savings account of people, but the dollar may be used as like trading or whatever. I don't know, but I feel like short term it's not going to happen per se, but long term it's inevitable. Why? Because all of these fiat currencies, they're in the hands of politicians. And I'm going to tell you one thing that is always true. Politicians are not the best investors. And when they fuck up, they're also not the most humble people. And instead of just accepting their errors and like paying the full price of it, for example, for a private company, that would be like, oh no, we fucked up. Let's go bankrupt. There's no other way around it. They're instead going to press the magic button where they can press a 1 and then lots of zeros behind it. And suddenly, poof, their mistakes are gone. What does that mean? All of the fiat currencies, they're on the same path. It's just that the Venezuelan bolivar and the Mozambique currency and Zimbabwe dollar or whatever, they just got there first. But all of them, they're going in the same direction. It's just a matter of time. So in 150 years, 200 years, only Bitcoin will be there truly. And then many other countries will try to, in an authoritarian dictatorship way, try to enclose their people. Oh no, you only need to use this currency. Like it already happens nowadays. But Bitcoin will be the de facto only money.
And that's why we Bitcoin also know it's the most conservative thing that you could possibly own right now, because like the general public is like, oh, like it's so risky, it's so volatile. No, like it's the only thing that will conserve and preserve your financial energy over the next 200 years. And if you want to do that, like what else would you park your money in? Like companies, like gold, like
Yeah,
it's really hard.
yeah. I mean, it's funny that you bring up gold now because we're starting to see how it's unraveling in the London Stock Exchange or gold exchange. Like interest rates are going super high, 8 weeks before you can get your gold delivered, all of that. So yeah, and gold was the second best option to Bitcoin, right? So anyway, companies. Look, Blockbuster was the biggest company in was one of the biggest companies in the 2000s, right? By 2010, it didn't exist. Netflix nowadays is one of the biggest companies. Is it going to be here in the 2040s, 2050s, by the end of the century? Right? That is the whole Michael Saylor spiel, right? Of like, oh, Bitcoin is the only one that you can verifiably, or like, you have once you study how they work, it's the highest confidence that it's going to be around for the next at least 150 to 1,000 years.
What do you think is I mean, some of them we already covered, but what do you think are the implications of Bitcoin being adopted in the world? Interesting. Your recording failed for some reason.
Ooh, okay. I cut, right?
Now you see me again?
I see you again. Yeah. Did you also get that weird, like, oh, not able to add more frames or something?
It said that your let me. By the way, is that your first? I've not seen a lot of podcasts from you.
No, it's not my first one. I've done a few others with Knut van Holm and Luke de Wolf, Bitcoin
Oh,
Infinity.
nice,
Also, yeah, that was very good, especially for Bitcoin mining. So if someone wants
nice.
to hear about Bitcoin mining in depth, perhaps you can shill that. Like if someone is more interested in my thoughts on Bitcoin mining, that one would be the one. And otherwise, I did the one with Ian Major recently. That was more about like the demand pool and pool decentralization. So that was very interesting. But yeah, want to ask the question again and we keep rolling?
I was just because of first
Yeah.
for some reason I didn't find anyone, but I was like, oh, like you are so good in speaking. You probably have been on other podcasts. Yeah, that's. I think everything is set nicely. Should I ask you the question again? Because what was the
What do you think the world will look like with Bitcoin
yeah,
adoption?
exactly. What are the implications of Bitcoin being adopted?
I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to answer it from an economics perspective because I feel like the whole paradigm is going to change in the sense that, first of all, deflation is not going to be linear and perfect. Like deflation is going to be volatile. Let's say you take 10 years, and over those 10 years, there's going to be a total of 2 to 3% deflation per year, more or less. But some objects, some industries, some materials will actually have gone up in price over that time, and they may eventually come back down, or they just stay up there. For example, oil, at some point we're going to actually truly start running out of oil, and at that point the price is just going to go up, right? There's no way around it. But other things like TVs or actually everything is actually going to start slowly going down in price, but it's not going to go all at the same time. So what happens? So what does that mean for the rest of the economy? What we're going to see is that people are not going to get so many salary increases. So like increasing your salary will once again matter. It will actually mean something because there's this thing called sticky prices, where people, like especially with wages, that happens a lot with salaries. People don't like their salary, their number that they're paid to go down. And that was something that was learned at the same time that the economists in general learned about how bad inflation was. And that was after the First World War, when the UK government, against the wishes and the recommendations of most economists, started implementing a forced deflation to go back to the gold to pound ratio pre First World War. And that's where they were literally like lowering the wages of everyone forcibly, and then also lowering the prices of everything. But of course, it didn't all happen at the same time. So that's where the whole thing of like, oh, inflation is bad, most likely comes from, and that was because it was a government mandated and coordinated thing. But when it's coordinated by the free market and it's just the forces of the free market and technology acting on products and services to make them cheaper over time, what will happen is that people still don't like to, hey, this year you're getting paid 2% less. Like, nobody likes that. Nobody wants that. So what you're effectively getting is every year, let's say you get paid 40K a year, or let's put it in sats, 100,000 sats a year. That could be a good salary, or perhaps it's crazy in 100 years. Like it's getting paid $1 million now. Who knows? But let's say 100,000 sats. That means that every year you will be getting paid those 100,000 sats, but you will also be able to purchase, on average, 2 to 3% more. And after 10 years, you will have effectively gotten a 20% increase in your salary, right? So what will happen is your employer is not going to just have to keep up with inflation. If anything, they may even ask you to lower your salary every now and then. But of course, that's going to be contrasted. Like, that's going to be balanced out with, you don't, like, nobody wants to get paid less, so let's stick wages. And you are going to be 10 years older. You're going to have that much more knowledge. So you will actually be capable of getting a small salary bump. And it will be a meaningful one, right? Because at that point, it's not, oh, there was 10% inflation, we're going to increase your salary by 8%. Oh, thanks, I only lost 2% of my salary, right? It's going to be like, hey, over the last 10 years, you were getting paid the same, but every year you were able to buy more. Now we're going to actually give you even a better, like, you're actually going to be able to have more purchasing power. Not just because of the free market, but because you're providing more to the free market, to the company, and therefore we're going to be able to pay you. And that's going to be super interesting, because having or getting a salary increase will start to matter much more, and people's, like, everything changes. Like, the government doesn't need to care anymore about, we have to increase the minimum wage because otherwise people cannot live. It will actually be the opposite. Like, hey, perhaps we should lower the minimum wage, right? Because now someone working as a bank teller or like in the supermarket, they're actually making twice as much as 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right? So that's going to be very interesting. It's what everyone says, right? It's going to bring a world of abundance. Instead of having to have the rat race, you're out of it. And not just out of it on the neutral, it's actually working in your favor. So it's going to be a huge difference.
And now I already see that to some extent, because I now get paid in Bitcoin, most of my income actually, and you already feel the consequences a little bit. Where okay, I set my prices in euros, and I got that amount like 8 months ago, and now I'm only getting that amount.
Yeah, but
it's hard to keep up with Bitcoin already, even though like I'm a fast growing small company, even though it's still hard to keep up. But honestly, I feel that's way better to have a lower nominal number, but a higher purchasing power with that, versus having lower purchasing power but a higher nominal number. But people are not ready for that.
no, but of course, it's also not going to happen all at the same time. And the changes, I mean, we were talking about this with the meetup where we do our meetups. It's this co-working, and the guy always sells beers, and he has his own BTC Pay server and all of that, right? And I was looking at one of the invoices recently, and now that the price is at 100K, that's very good, because the conversion is very simple. 2 euros is like 2,000 sats. And I was looking at that, and I was like, dude, do you remember like a year and a half ago, this invoice, instead of 2,000 sats, was like 7,000 sats? It's like, how does that feel? First of all, in a way, you sold me a €7 beer, but also at the same time, now you're getting less sats. So, but that's very extreme, right? That's a very extreme example. But in the future, it's going to be like, products are always going to be a bit cheaper. Your salary is going to stay the same, right? You're going to get the same amount of sats, 100,000 sats. And unless you somehow become dumber and provide less value in 10 years, you will actually get a meaningful raise in your sats, in your salary, while the rest of the objects keep going down. But of course, if something happens like a pandemic or a war, and suddenly supply chains are constrained, there could actually be inflation for a short while. But of course, that inflation will be offset by actual faster deflation, right? It's going to be like a bump. You first go up, that's going to be very fast, right? Oh no, things are now costing, like it happened with olive oil here in Spain. That's the most Spanish thing ever. Like olive oil prices started to go up, not because of money. Well, I think a liter of olive oil used to cost, like, by the way, good quality olive oil, not like mixed with seed oils or whatever, like the pure shit used to cost like €2.50 per liter. And it started going up with COVID to like, I think it was like 3.5, €4. That's already pretty bad. That's already 100% increase almost. And then last year we had a drought, and that was very bad for the olive production, which also meant that it was a very, very bad production for olive oil. And the prices went up to like 12 to 15 euros per liter. And people were like, oh my, like, in Spain, we actually had a crisis because of olive oil. Like, our oil crisis is different to the oil crisis in the US. For them, it's gasoline. For us, it is our olive oil, right? And the funny thing is, recently my mom was telling me, hey, by the way, Kenobi, you know that, well, she doesn't call me Kenobi, but anyway, you know that now olive oil prices are back down to like €5, €4.50. And I was like, that's a perfect example of how inflation or like supply shocks or demand shocks will happen in the future in regards to price. So let's say the war in Ukraine, right? All the gas prices are going up. All the oil prices are going. What a big problem. Now we're paying more, right? We Bitcoiners, we all know it's a lie. But in the future, what would happen is, as on this like continual slow slope, we would see a big increase, and then we'll just return back to normal after 1 year, 2 years, when the free market has managed to like go around the problem, so to speak, right? Or conditions change. Because in this case, what happened is this year we had a good a lot of rain, and therefore the oil, the olive production was good, and therefore the oil production was also good. Supply comes back up, the price comes back down, and we're back at €5. But of course, people are not ready for that. And people think that what that happened, that's actually deflation. What all the economists say, oh, it's so bad, it's so bad. But in reality, that's a good deflation. And anyway, that's the whole thing. So I think that's what's going to happen in the future. Like, that's going to happen with all of the products. They're going to slowly go down. Some will actually have some increases. Some will go down faster. Some will actually not move or get more expensive. But on average, all of them 2% down.
Yeah. And it's interesting with the salary of like, maybe we even get to the point where companies, because there's a lot of price pressure and competition, actually have to have a hard conversation with the employee and saying like, oh, like we have to lower your salary from like 100,000 to 90,000, but those 90,000 are like 90 might be 10% is probably too much, or like we have to lower it like 5%. But those 95,000 sats will probably buy you more than the 100,000 sats in the previous year.
Exactly. And actually 10% may not even be too crazy. I remember someone did an analysis. Some crazy person had been doing a perfect accounting of everything they bought, like groceries, for the past like 15 years on an Excel spreadsheet. And they published the results in like 2021, more or less, 2022. And something that they noted is that, for example, with food prices, they only increase every 5 years, 5 to 6 years. So what they do is, in a way, if that's how the inflation is going, they will for a while go under, but then when they decide to change the price, they go up above, and they take, right? And so for a while, they are actually outrunning inflation, but then inflation catches back up, and then they're back underwater. So they don't change the prices all the time. That's also something that's going to be very, very interesting that people don't realize. Everyone's always like, oh, Bitcoin is so volatile. How are we going to be protected? What if we cannot manage the money? Then everything's going to be volatile and whatnot. And people don't realize that companies already take care of that. Like, this smoothing out of like, hey, we're only going to change the price of milk every 5 to 6 years to adjust inflation, is companies protecting consumers from volatility. when Apple started to make the titanium on their iPhones, like their titanium iPhones, the iPhone Pros or whatever, like I think it was like 5 months later, the price of titanium increased by like 300% or something like that. The prices of iPhones didn't go up. It's just that companies take care of like absorbing that volatility. So like it's not that like because people say, oh, with Bitcoin, how like the Bitcoin is so volatile. Like how are we gonna be able to price anything on the market, like on the grocery store or anywhere? It's like, guys, it's not gonna be like there's gonna be like a live chart of the price of pears and apples and bananas. Like no, because there's companies in between that they manage this volatility for the end consumer.
But it would be fun if like there's like always a live price chat of like cherries and bananas and like it's gone down 0.3% today.
I don't know if it will be too fun because I think it was something like Walmart or Sears. One of the analysts spoke about one of their new inventions, and it's those digital, instead of price tags, digital price tags. And it was saying that, oh, in a hot summer day, the price of water could go up by 150%, or it starts raining and umbrellas could be priced at 3 times the price, right? So perhaps we don't want the perfect free market with perfect mark-to-market prices on everything all the time. You know what I mean? It's like that's a bit, instead of cypherpunk, it's a bit cyberpunk, and that's not so fun.
But it's interesting how, for example, on the gas station, it's normal. Like on a gas station, you always like see the big price of like, oh, like that's how much you pay. But for almost everything else that consumers buy, like it's like a fixed one.
That's interesting. You're right. Yeah. That, I guess it's because gas is a more commodity, but also apples are also a commodity, right? And corn and potatoes. That's a nice rabbit hole. I'll have to dig deep on that one. See what I come up with.
Like then let's circle back in like 6 months and see what you found.
Exactly.
in the second round of the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really cool. I enjoyed it a lot. Our podcast already. We are overtime. I hope you don't have an appointment directly next to it. But I asked one question that I asked each and every one of my guests, and this is the question of what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
From me, well, Bitcoin mining.
You cannot learn about Bitcoin, but you can learn about Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin mining is the main thing that because in a way it's also different from Bitcoin because man, Bitcoin mining is its own rabbit hole. But otherwise, apart from that, I guess Star Wars. I mean, we have the R2D2. I don't know if it's on camera up here somewhere. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Star Wars. And otherwise, right now I'm blanking. Economics. Like I guess economics would be the one. Like I've been trying to, like, 'cause I don't have enough time, but like I've been trying to go down the Austrian economics rabbit hole now that I'm out of college and I don't have all of that fiat to learn. I've been trying to start going down the rabbit hole, start to read all of the classics, and then also get further down the behavioral economics rabbit hole. I know that people like Safety Namus and whatnot, they just outright hand wave it away, like, oh, it doesn't matter. But I feel like there's something there. There's something there. I just need to go down that path, explore it a bit more. So I think that would be the thing, like economics. I love talking economics, thinking about how things would be, why yes, why not, like all of that. So I think economics, Bitcoin mining, and economics. Let's put it that way.
I love that, yeah, and that's that behavioral economics is really interesting. I like that a lot. If like how you price things, how you present things, makes such a huge difference. But yeah, like that's great. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is, and the question for you is, what is the most deeply and meaningful thing about Bitcoin that anyone can contribute to Bitcoin?
Ooh, so how can you maximize your impact towards Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Not making it easy. It's the most. Not Bitcoin mining. There's already enough of that. And if you do be sure to like contact us at Demand Pool, Stratum V2, all of that, decentralized Bitcoin mining. Yoo-hoo, Bitaccess. Bitaccess, that's a good one. I think perhaps mining is the one. Yeah, Bitaccess. But at the same time, it's a small impact, and perhaps you can do more impact by just like orange pilling people. I'm torn apart between Bitax, so like joining the Bitax movement, and just orange pilling, like in the sense of like not just like hitting people with Bitcoin, because that's what many people do. They just scream Bitcoin at people's faces, but more like sitting down, having the patience to explain it. But if I had to choose one of them, I would say the Bitax movement. So like joining Bitax, because just by doing that, if you have it at your house, the moment someone comes over, you can show it to them, and that opens up the conversation, and you're already orange pilling, while also mining Bitcoin, securing the network, and hey, who knows, getting a block. So I think Bitax would be the one. Yeah, Bitax.
That's really cool. Amazing. Perfect. Then the only last thing that comes to my mind is like, where can people find you? Where can people ask you questions and reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm one of the organizers of the Bitcoin meetup in Barcelona, Barcelona Bitcoin only. So if you come through Barcelona, feel free to join the Telegram group. Otherwise, you can find me at Twitter at Kenobi General 5. And then also Noster, Kenobi. And otherwise, I would quickly shill, but I already did, the company I'm working for. Stratum V2, Demand Pool is the first company. This is the first pool decentralizing Bitcoin mining with Stratum V2. So deploying free open source software to like secure Bitcoin for all of us. So that's pretty dope. So follow us there. We're demand_pool on Twitter. And we also have a website, dmnd.org, so without the vowels. And I think that's it.
Really cool. I love that you. I think you mentioned at least Bitcoin meetup like at least like 4 times in the conversation. So it seems like it's something very important for you, and I think that speaks to you of like it's important that Bitcoiners meet in person with each other. I think it's a really great thing to do.
That could also be a great answer for the question that you posed me before. Going to a Bitcoin meetup, and also, even more important, going to a conference. I feel like going to a conference. If you're a Bitcoiner and you have never been to a conference, you're missing out.
Are you going to, in Europe, the biggest next one is probably Bitcoin Prague. Are you going there?
Yeah, I'm going to be there. Everyone should be there.
Really cool. I love that. Yeah, like actually, I don't want to make too much advertisement, but it's actually one of my official partners.
Hell yeah.
And Bitcoin Prague is such an amazing thing, because like in the starting, when I was just getting started in Bitcoin, I was going to Bitcoin Prague. I was like, let's go there. Let's see. It's close to my hometown. It was not that far away. And I was getting that energy of like, I want to do more. And that was basically like the starting ignition that I needed to start the whole thing that I'm now doing with the podcast. So like Bitcoin Prague is, I think, going to a conference and also meetups, like if you cannot afford to like, or like you don't want to invest in money to move around the planet and then go somewhere, you can just go to a local meetup. That's not as good as a conference, but it does also a really good job in doing the things. Like it's perfectly fine. But if you have the means to go to a conference, like you basically have to go there and then experience the thing there. And yeah, Bitcoin Prague is a huge recommendation of mine.
Bitcoin Prague. There's now also Bitcoin Helsinki. We're going to have a Bitcoin conference in Barcelona, but that's one that's a bit more private. In Spain, we also have Watch Out Bitcoin. France has Bitcoin Biarritz. There's in the UK they have Bitcoin, the cheat code by Peter McCormack. Germany has also the Citadelle. Like any of these, or Baltic Honey Badger, the original European conference, any of these, they're just incredible. And you should go at least to one of them. At least. Afterwards, you will go to the others, because it just makes sense. Like the value is so present, and the rest makes sense. But that's why I'm saying go at least to one. The rest follows by itself.
Absolutely. And if you go to some conference, use code Robin. And perfect. And thank you so much, Kenobi, for being on the show. You have been an amazing guest. Thank you so much for taking time. Thank you so much also for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Robin. Bye.